Today we return to the first Red Dead Redemption to explore a theory that isn't awfully popular but is somewhat interesting. I was made aware of this theory by Phil, who runs Filbee Gaming, a channel you should definitely subscribe to, by the way, and apparently this one had been circulating on particular circles of TikTok, which is a platform that I don't really use very often. But it was certainly interesting, so I thought I'd hazard an investigation of my own, on top of the research that's clearly already out there in the wild, and then use reasoning to explain whether or not it fits narratively. But largely I was just missing doing this style of content. Anyway, the broad outline of this theory is that Dutch van der Linde, as we see him in Red Dead Redemption 1 to be specific, had an unimaginably dark secret of sorts, which for an openly wanted outlaw is a tough bar to clear. But it would be appropriately Rockstar even if I don't necessarily know if it was intentional. And that is that Dutch van der Linde's mental decline had descended so far that he'd turned to cannibalism. Does that sound crazy enough? I bet it does. But let's look at the information the games provide us with, and then we can judge.
I can't fight my own nature. That's a paradox, John.
Now, I hadn't heard about this theory until the other day, but I have evidence to suggest that it has in fact been floating around since the very release of Red Dead Redemption on the Xbox 360 in 2010. It crops up every once in a while and people don't hate the theory, though it is admittedly a hard sell, but I can find precious little available sources documenting the bulk of the substance. It does appear as if the vast majority of the TikTok content that Phil sent to me originated from this Tumblr blog posted by Hosea's Angry Ghost. Of course, I will leave a link to every source I use in the description, but for now, let's investigate this one for ourselves. Now, Dutch van der Linde is a character made infinitely more complex by the addition of Red Dead Redemption 2. And though he possesses complexities in the first game, he's presented far more traditionally as the twisted Western villain, and that provided less room for interpretation versus what we know about Dutch now. So while we know more about his personality, character, morals, principles, so on and so forth, it's difficult to pinpoint just how much of Dutch is presented sincerely, and therefore there's a lot of room for debate as to whether or not he was a good man turned bad or always a bad man, using his philosophy to excuse his meaningless violence and rally other people to his cause. And though I personally think both interpretations have merit, and Red Dead Redemption 2 hints to that as well, what matters is the story of the prequel scrapes these redeeming qualities of Dutch away, leaving behind a paranoid, merciless, ruthless man, one willing to intentionally or otherwise destroy everything he's built in the gang, the family around him, in a desperate attempt to evade the encroachment of modernized society. And though he becomes increasingly reckless and more unpredictable, I think it's fair to say his core objective remains largely the same. And come the end of the story, it's perhaps the only thing that matters to him. His own survival.
What matters? What's always mattered?
Surviving.
The result, not the means, which I guess is sort of the same thing. We'll survive. We'll keep moving forward. Maybe we'll leave the West far behind.
And do what?
Give it time. Look at the birds. Look at the beasts. Copy what the best ones do.
What Red Dead Redemption 2 does is set up and establish Dutch to be a rock-bottom form of himself come the time of the first game. So though we never see him running the gang in his prime, he's still in a position where the path he's on isn't irreversible. But Red Dead Redemption shows his descent into insanity as being complete. He is now a ruthless murderer, an outlaw through and through with no nuance. It makes sure to establish that it was once present, but now all that remains is a deranged killer, with no regard for the lives he has to take in order to ensure his own survival. Though once idealistic, he is now simply a delusional maniac, and this version of Dutch's only human moment is his demise.
We can't always fight nature, John. We can't fight change. Can't fight gravity. We can't fight nothing. My whole life, all I ever did was fight.
Then give up, Dutch.
But I can't give up, neither. I can't fight my own nature. That's a paradox, John. You see?
Then I have to shoot you.
When I'm gone, they'll just find another monster. They have to. Because they have to justify their wages.
That's their business.
Our time has passed, John.
And it's here where the theory that we're about to discuss comes in. Every time the story takes us to Dutch's new gang hideout at Cochonay in tall trees, we're only really looking from afar or simply blasting through the place at 1,000,000 miles per hour. However, following concluding the main story, we can revisit Cochonay at any time we like, and it is upon doing that that things start to get interesting. For there is supposedly evidence here that supports the theory that Dutch has been eating people, and though he had a good 100-man strong gang here, Dutch being Dutch, his living quarters stood out and he had certain creature comforts that did not extend to his fellow gang members. You may remember passing through those living quarters as you made your way through the cave during Dutch's last stand. Rather swiftly, you come to an open area with a fire, a seat, loads of books, human skulls, which appear to be ornamental, plentiful remains of animals, and a vast quantity of femurs strewn about the place, specifically around the fire with a pile of them beneath what we can only assume is Dutch's seat. And on the table next to the seat there is a mostly uneaten slab of meat. The human skulls, of which there are 3 in this chamber, appear to be ornamental decorations, and that's kind of about as far as anybody's gone with that. As for the femurs, they don't appear to be ornamental, however they do appear to be human. A theory given credit by the presence of human remains in the room, but it is baffling as to why there would be seemingly human femurs piled up in a disorganised fashion around the fire and under Dutch's chair. They aren't decoration as they appear to be discarded, so these femurs' only logical reason for being present the way they are is because they were used for food. And that is basically where the substance behind the theory begins and ends. Just because these bones appear to be modelled after human femurs, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're there to represent. This is a game, fiction, it's not real. And aside from skulls, all the other remains around this place appear to be that of animals. Considering the abundance of other food sources, would people really be on the menu? On top of game, the camp also has plentiful livestock. Chickens, goats, pigs. In other words, a reasonable surplus of food, at least until I came along and shot it all. And on top of that, if cannibalism was at play, you would expect to see more discarded identifiable human remains than just skulls used as ornamental decorations and femurs. So realistically, that's where you'd say the theory was dead in the water before you saw liftoff. But the game has used the solitary presence of discarded human femurs before to indicate the presence of cannibals. In the Stranger Mission chain American Appetites, John is tasked with tracking down various residents of Armadillo's loved ones who have seemingly disappeared around the town, with each episode of this chain abruptly ending when you find a small bloody patch in the land, maybe some human clothing, and a femur, and little more. And eventually we track down a cannibal responsible for these people going missing, confirming that they were indeed eaten. On top of this, you can find other cannibals encamped out in the sticks, with human skulls and femurs discarded around the fireplace, along with other half-eaten body parts confirming the kind of abhorrence occurring here. So finding similar bones strewn around a fireplace in Dutch's cavern, considering the game has been crafted that deliberately, is arguably grounds enough for a double take. Is there a classic Rockstar Games hidden message in all of that, or is it just the reuse of an asset to paint a picture? As it could just be the same asset being reused to depict a different animal, such as a deer, with hopes that people wouldn't look too deeply into it, Or is there really a greater implication about Dutch here? By the events of 1911, Dutch van der Linde is shown to have absolutely zero regard for human life. He will kill anybody who gets in his way, even innocents, either out of spite or to cause a scene in order to secure an escape. And though over the course of Red Dead Redemption 2 especially, he puts himself in his mind above certain actions, he is demonstrated to not really in truth be above doing those things at all. In other words, it may be far-fetched for him, but it's not too far-fetched for him, if that makes any sense. But there is yet more to explore here. Through a tarp, we can enter a chamber in which there is a bed and a bathtub. It's clear this is where Dutch slept, and the bathtub is apparently interesting. It has all kinds of stains on it. At a first glance, they appear to be caused by rust, and though I'd argue that's all it is, the theory goes that these are in fact bloodstains, though I personally find it difficult to believe that Dutch slept next to where he gutted people before eating them. Upon turning the brightness up as much as possible, I would argue it's also unlikely that you'd go into it and come out any cleaner. But above all else, I'd argue this represents Dutch's final lifestyle that he's clinging to even in his final days. And besides, there's probably no waterworks in this cave, and I doubt it's made of high-grade materials, so rust it more than likely is. So the only real area of concern we have are the discarded bones, along with some mysterious meat that, though in an interesting position, we have no real reason to suspect is human. So in reality, the theory is quite thin on the ground, likely unintentionally existing courtesy of the reuse of an asset, and with human remains otherwise present regardless, it does become somewhat interesting, I can't lie. Because these skulls did indeed have to come from somewhere, and Dutch certainly does kill enough people. And in his increasingly fractured mental state, why wouldn't he use those fresh kills as a form of resource? After all, the notion of people being resources to him is not new. In the events of Red Dead Redemption 2, there are points where Dutch may believe that he cares about the gang, but over the course of the game it becomes increasingly clear that maybe he doesn't. He surrounds himself with individuals purely to satisfy his needs. The competent guns of the gang rob in his name. The diversity in members gives this commune exterior and allows Dutch to project his twisted ideologies, and that satisfies his ego. And he needs to feed on that in order to keep the Dutch that he sees in himself alive. So in the metaphorical sense, at the very least, he's feeding on people already. And when that magic no longer works on individuals, for example Arthur Morgan and John Marston, Dutch has to look elsewhere for that parasitic validation, and that's how Micah began to influence him, leading to the betrayal that saw the demise of the gang altogether. Because though Dutch thought he was preying on another impressionable reprobate, the only thing he was truly consuming was venom. So from the perspective of storytelling, there is room for that metaphor for Dutch to become entirely literal, as one way or another, to some degree, other people have always been a resource to him. In storytelling, the line between metaphors and what's intended literally can become blurred, and often what's implied as a figure of speech early into a story can become an accurate foreshadowing of what can occur later. So while you couldn't apply this mental logic to a real person, you certainly could with a fictional one. But we have established that, contrary to the theory, Dutch doesn't actually have a reason to be a cannibal. Or does he? Kochene is demonstrated to be self-sufficient. It's far from ideal living, but resources certainly aren't sparse. And it's not like Dutch isn't willing to leave his hideout either. He's demonstrated himself to be more than happy to stroll into Blackwater and cause chaos down there. So theoretically it wouldn't be impossible to hunt in the Tall Trees area, and there's plenty of evidence, such as animal remains, to suggest that this is something that Dutch and his current gang partake in. So what if Dutch hypothetically was a cannibal? If the reason wasn't for sustenance, what other purpose could it serve? Perhaps intimidation? Allow me to explain, but in order to do so we'll need to quickly read a newspaper. Specifically the article Notorious Bad Man Alive, found in the Blackwater Ledger number 73. And it reads as follows. Van der Linde reported seen in Tall Trees. On the run 7 years. Gang members still at large. A dispatch from Tall Trees reports a sighting of the infamous outlaw Dutch van der Linde, who has been on a bloody run from the law for many years now. The notorious Dutch's boys gang once plagued this state, but it was believed to have disbanded as long ago as 1899. Two of his henchmen, Hosea Matthews and Arthur Morgan, were both killed in separate raids by Pinkerton agents that same year. And though this article is largely hinting at Dutch's surprise appearance atop Mount Hagen in the showdown with Micah Bell at the very end of the epilogue, it tells us that Dutch may have been active in the Tall Trees region as early as 1907, 4 years before the events of Red Dead Redemption. Now, we know Mount Hagen is not in Tall Trees, so the article isn't telling us roughly where to find Dutch, only that during the Beecher's Hope epilogue chapter, he's closer than we might think. And Tall Trees and its surrounding areas is a particularly volatile environment circa 1907, courtesy of the presence of the Skinner brothers, a ruthless gang of angry murderers, notorious for their horrifically sadistic and cruel acts. And as a result of their reputation, they have something of a stranglehold on the region. If Dutch was concurrently present, how would he ensure his safety here? How would he even begin to go about intimidating the most evil of humanity? In order to do so, surely one must become worse than them. In this environment, shedding away whatever humanity Dutch had left would be within his best interests. And yet, becoming a monster and scranning people does still sound a little bit far-fetched. But at the very least in this environment, I wouldn't believe it to be impossible either.
Look at the beasts. Copy what the best ones do.
So to conclude, it's certainly a fun theory, but you can't afford to take it that bit too seriously, as the evidence to support it is wafer thin, if not nigh on non-existent. You could certainly rationalise it with meta-commentary and make it flush, and it is a fun idea to entertain. After all, the presence of what at the very least appear to be discarded human femurs around a campfire that Dutch would have occupied is just the kind of detail you would expect Rockstar to plant in their games. But this theory could in equal measure be running away with a reused asset innocently placed with no intent on sparking this type of debate. Nonetheless, it's not a theory I'd be comfortable discounting. I think you can make a case for it being narratively fitting with regards to Dutch's mental decline over the course of both games, and there are blanks to fill between the broken man we see in 1907 versus the utter maniac we get in 1911. Whether or not this particular theory could be one final piece in the puzzle to the infamous Dutch van der Linde hitting absolute rock bottom is inconclusive. Let me know what you think in the comments. Regardless, this has been a fun video to make, even if for the past 20 minutes all I've done is chat absolute drivel. But I do hope it's been entertaining nonetheless. But I'm going to leave today's video there before imposter syndrome overwhelms me. Thank you all for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. I'd really appreciate it, but that is of course your decision to make. And with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, please take care, and goodbye.